We already know the outcome of legislation that has been introduced into the Congress to end the Federal Reserve even before it goes to committee. Nonetheless, there's a reason why this is so important, not only from the federal side, but also from the state side as well. Let's talk about it as we explore. Coin World is reporting that there has been legislation introduced into the House and Senate that calls for the elimination of the Federal Reserve System, and I think that is great news. We do see bills like this come up from time to time, and even though we know that they are dead on arrival, they're not going to pass, it's still very important that they be introduced and talked about. Kentucky Representative Thomas Massie and Utah Senator Mike Lee served up similar bills in their respective chambers. And this is something that is going to upend the entire monetary system that has been in effect since December 23rd of 1913. The measures, H.R. 1846 and the Senate Bill 869, are each known as the Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act, which would abolish the Board of Governors and the 12 Federal Reserve banks. They would also repeal the Federal Reserve Act itself, which created the system back in 1913. Americans have suffered under crippling inflation, and the Federal Reserve is to blame, said Massie. During COVID, the Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars out of thin air and loaned it to the Treasury Department to enable unprecedented deficit spending. By monetizing the debt, the Federal Reserve devalued the dollar and enabled free money policies that caused high inflation. Well, Massie should have gone further and should have mentioned how the Federal Reserve has done the same thing, just on a lesser scale, all during multiple rounds of quantitative easing. And even before that, the very fact that we have inflation itself by the target of the Federal Reserve is criminal in my mind. The Federal Reserve has not only failed to achieve its mandate, it has become an economic manipulator, directly contributing to the financial instability many Americans face today, said Lee. We need to protect our economic future and the monetization of federal debt that fuels unchecked federal spending and put American money on solid ground. We need to end the Fed. And, we've heard about that talk for a long time, and most of us kind of balked at that kind of language that has come from many different circles in the precious metals community and also with regards to Austrian economic theorists. But nonetheless, it is true. It needs to go away. And even though this legislation is not going to do that, I do believe it will cause and spark a discussion. And what better time to do it than right now when there's more focus on it, especially with a potential visit to the Fort Knox, Kentucky, to visit the vault there, and also to audit the Fed. There's been multiple legislation that has been called for that as well, and to audit our gold reserves. So we know that they don't meet their mandate, and we know that really it needs to come to an end. You and I, we can end the Fed in our own lives, just as states are doing the same thing by recognizing gold and silver as money. But we'll get into that in a moment. I want to thank Summit Metals for sponsoring the channel. They have some specials going on right now over the weekend and into Monday, March 31st. And even though I'm not encouraging people to buy specifically because of a silver squeeze, check out their deals because they're running some specials. Most other dealers will probably be raising their prices, but not Summit Metals. The Federal Reserve System is something that has been around a long time. Every single one of us knows nothing but what we have been subjected to over the years of the Federal Reserve System. Monetizing debt is a closely coordinated effort between the Federal Reserve, Treasury Department, Congress, big banks, and Wall Street. Through this process, retirees see their savings evaporate due to the actions of a central bank pursuing inflationary policies that benefit the wealthy and connected. If we really want to reduce inflation, the most effective policy is to end the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act was first introduced by former Representative Ron Paul back in 1999 and hasn't been reintroduced since 2013, which is 100 years after the act. Earlier this year, Massey also introduced H.R. 24, the Federal Reserve Transparency Act of 2025, to audit the Federal Reserve. A similar measure to H.R. 24 was introduced by Paul in 2009. The Federal Reserve System was created in response to financial panics, particularly the severe panic of 1907. Its primary goal was to provide the U.S. with a more stable and flexible financial system. After the 1907 panic, Congress created the National Monetary Commission, led by Senator Nelson Aldrich, to study banking reform. The Aldrich Plan proposed a centralized banking system, but it faced opposition for being too controlled by big banks. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was a revised version of the Aldrich Plan, designed to balance power between private banks and government control. Today, the Federal Reserve controls monetary policy, regulates banks, and works to maintain economic stability by managing inflation, employment, and financial markets. And that's really the dual mandate that we talk about by maintaining managing inflation, strengthening or keeping the dollar, I guess, or whatever, stable, I guess, in that regards, with economic stability, but also managing employment as well. And that's really not their business. The natural market itself is really the what should be doing that. The economy and things that could boost the economy. And what is that? How is that done? By empowering people themselves. People are the drivers of the economic activity in the country, and not manipulating this. The dollar, which has lost about 99% of its value since the 1913, since the act came into being. Nonetheless, we believe certainly in having a gold and silver on hand to protect ourselves against economic instability. And really, that is the foundation. That is the most important thing. Thankfully, we are legally able to do so since December the 31st, 1974. And so we can be our own central bank in that way. And, and that I think is empowering for all of us. No matter what the dollar does, the longer we hold gold and silver, we realize the benefits of holding it to protect and preserve our wealth. And make no mistake, both gold and silver do that. All the data point to that throughout time. Of course, I don't have to convince many of you about gold doing it, as it's far outperformed inflation right now. In fact, that could lead to an extent of it being overvalued. Silver, on the other hand, is undervalued generally, but specifically, if you play your cards right, and that is to operate under the guise of dollar cost averaging, silver will preserve your wealth as well. That has been proven itself to be the case. Just look at a chart over the last 100 years. Adjusted for inflation, silver is a powerful wealth preservation device. The problem with silver is that it has a dual role. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate, and silver has a dual role now. It is seen mostly as an industrial metal with over 10,000 uses, and so therefore there's a lot pushing against it that is not pushing against gold. Gold is more valuable because it is treasured right now in the markets, but in reality, both metals have the same value. And the dollar, by definition and by mandate of the Federal Reserve, is a losing proposition. It is a loss leader. In other words, it is losing value over time, to the point where now we're paying so much in just interest on the debt that it is outpacing or close to outpacing the national defense budget. And that tells you something, folks. It's eating away at itself by what the Federal Reserve has done to slowly manage the decline of the dollar and manage the decline of our savings, each of us. If we have a savings vehicle and if we put it in a money market that has the same percentage of increase, annual percentage rate as the inflation rate of inflation, measured by the CPI, you are losing money. That's right, you are losing money. Why? Because you have to pay taxes on that interest gain, which is essentially fighting against what the very powers that be are doing. The Federal Reserve is a manipulative force by design. Gold and silver, even though they can be manipulated, and we know that that happens, they preserve your wealth. And in the end, they will come back to natural law, the natural law of wealth preservation. So this is why it's important, and I'm glad and thankful for Thomas Massie and for Senator Mike Lee for introducing this pair of legislation. We'll see what happens through the course of time. This is obviously going to die, but thank them for introducing it, and hopefully we'll see more of this type of thing happen on the federal side as well as by the states who are working right now to have policies to make gold and silver legal tender, to remove taxation from gold and silver, which is a way to render the Federal Reserve irrelevant if enacted and taken out to its full measure. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Hope you found this video informative, insightful, and educational. Would like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.